What's the quickest you've ever seen a new co-worker get fired? A guy refusing to wear safety gear, or PPE on his first day. He flat out said, no, to the supervisor, who then fired him. He didn't even make it to the first coffee break. If he was that adamant about not wearing safety gear, it wasn't a good sign. Kid came in on his first day, thinking he could boss everyone around, since he just finished culinary school, strike one. Caught him later that day, vaping in the prep area of the kitchen, strike two. He asked on his second day, if he could leave for 30 minutes, to make a drug deal. Needless to say, that was strike three. Back in the mid-1990s, I had hired a guy for senior Unix systems administration role. It was made quite clear, in the posted job description, the interview process, and on his first day, that this role would be required to be on call a few nights per month, on a rotating basis, with the other Unix admins. The salary reflected that, as well. This was a six-figure position. He was issued a company laptop, and a cell phone for his on-call work, that could be done from home. As part of the onboarding process, our Unix lead admin wanted this guy to shadow him on his on-call evening, so that he could see how processes differed in the off hours. It was his second day on the job. That evening, I happened to be working a bit late, and the help desk calls me, saying, they've got an issue that needs to be escalated to the Unix team, and asking if they've got the right number for the new guy, because it's just ringing, and going to a default voicemail mailbox. I tell them to call the lead admin, to get him working on the issue, and that I'll contact the new guy myself. I call. Same thing, voicemail. Multiple times. I fish out his employment docs, that are all still sitting on my desk, and find his home phone number. I call, and get about 3 words out of my mouth, when he responds, why the F are you calling me at home? And hangs up. A bit in disbelief, I look back at the paperwork and verify, yes, this is his phone number, and try it again. Thinking, maybe he'd mistaken me for someone else. I receive a similar bit of vitriol, and a hang up. I contact the lead admin, and inform him, he won't be having the new guy join him that night, or any other. We immediately killed all of his system access, and his door card, and HR was waiting for him at the reception area, first thing in the morning. Within the first 2 hours of training with me, she asks where she can go and have a smoke. I tell her, just outside there's a smoking area. She proceeds to walk outside, in front of all the supervisors, lights up the biggest blunt, and openly smokes it. She got walked out 5 minutes later. Worked at a place where you couldn't be colorblind, because you were reading schematics, and identifying connectors, of varying different colors. There was hundreds of tiny connectors in one array. Somehow, by the grace of God, this guy got hired. Either they forgot to implement the CB test, or he successfully guessed his way through it. He trains for a week, and is put onto the line to build $20,000 cables for effing missiles. His very first connector, he spent all day on, soldering and connecting and signing the paperwork and the steps, gave it to QC for inspection. It was one of the most effed up examples of a connector anyone had seen. Next day, guy admits he's colorblind, and whether he can keep the job. He's let go, because he cost the company $20,000. The connector was put on display in HR, to drive home the importance of sticking to hiring procedures. Hired my friend's sister, as a hostess, at a restaurant. She called off for her first shift, 3 hours later, telling me that she was having a tough period. 30 minutes into her dinner shift, she started posting pics on Instagram, of her being at a party in Canada. We live in New York. Fired her via Instagram. Never even worked, then tried to claim unemployment, then had her father call me, and try to threaten me into rehiring here. She was 34. When I worked in data entry, there was a tricycle on our office floor, just added as a relaxed bit of fun by the managers, who were all very chill people. One of the girls that got hired, around the same time as me, would, instead of working, just ride the tricycle around the office all day, every day. When we all showed up in the morning, she wouldn't even log into her computer. She would just get right on the tricycle, and ride around, talking to people, until she left, to take her lunch break. The day she got fired, she had to be escorted out of the building, because she was screaming about, "You're targeting me unfairly. LOL." This guy shows up, the VP is gloating, how great and brilliant he is, blah blah blah. First day, doesn't come in until 10 a.m. Next day, same deal, like working from 10 to 12, then leaving. Meanwhile, they flew him on a business trip leaving Wednesday, and supposed to come back Friday. At the last second, he rebooked himself on a midnight flight. Meanwhile, on the Friday flight back at the last second, he was like, "Oh, I have to take a different flight," and he just disappeared. What Mr. Mysterious didn't realize is, most of us used to work at his previous employer. Someone sent us a text, "Hey, I thought you hired, blah blah blah, he's making copies right now." Turns out, he was working 2 jobs. These are both science, tech companies, with not that strict NDAs, but you can't work at a potential competitor simultaneously. He was fired from both jobs. Orientation, second day. He's to sit in a conference room and read through binders of important info. Our boss walks out and closes the door. It has a window with blinds open to see through. Going about our day, and the boss asks us why the conference door's locked and blinds closed. Nobody is sure, so they get security to open the door to see this effing guy kicked back with the lights off, asleep. He had closed the blinds and locked the door. Of course, he was out there that day. I was at my job for like 3 years, and I once slept through my alarm clock and didn't show up until 11 a.m. We started at roughly 7. I am salary, but I thought for sure I was going to get written up or reprimanded. Not to sound self-congratulatory or anything, but I feel like I am a good worker, and my performance reviews have all been very positive. It's just for context. I went right to my boss and apologized profusely. He cracked up, thought it was hilarious, and he told me he figured I either slept through my alarm or something happened to me. I didn't get in any trouble, he just told me not to make a habit of it, but he never let me live it down. I bought a new alarm clock right after work. During their onboarding training, they stole my boss's wallet on camera. 1 hour in. I had a new hire once come in for first day training at a coffee shop I was managing, and after she left, my other worker couldn't find the rings she had taken off to wash the dishes. Next day, new girl comes in to train with us, wearing the rings. She didn't even try to deny taking them, she just acted like it was no big deal. After handing them over, I just told her it wasn't going to work out. She just shrugged and said, "Okay." All jovial, smiled, and waved bye. I seriously think there was something wrong with that girl. Small family company that in my lifetime, 34 years, went from 3 to 80 employees. One woman has been there 30 years, and almost feels like a family member. Her daughter struggled with mental issues in high school, and in therapy it came out that she had been sexually abused as a kid by an older kid. Others corroborated the story. Because it was never an official charge, that's the type of thing that doesn't show up on a background check. A few years pass, her daughter goes to college, meets a great guy, gets engaged, her life is going well. And I hire a new warehouse worker. I'm doing his onboarding, and bring him to the office for introductions. The mom's face drops. She pulls me aside. I had hired the abuser. I told him an unforeseen conflict had come up, and I wouldn't contest unemployment. Those are the types of situations they don't really prepare you for in management. Law enforcement agency, dispatcher trainee hired as a favor to their parent, who was friends with the head of the agency. Guy, who was already annoying, bragged and showed off that he was sexting an underage female, even showing it to sworn officers. Went quickly from employee to client. I once saw a new coworker get fired on their first day during lunch. They loudly bragged about how they lied on their resume to get the job. Unfortunately, they didn't realize the boss was sitting right behind them. By the time we got back to the office, their desk was already cleared out. They were gone before we even finished our afternoon coffee. It is just insane how stupid some people are. She called the first day and said her grandmother died. Called the next day and said her car wouldn't start. Called the third day and said her blow dryer broke, so she couldn't dry her hair. Never made it to work. Hired a guy after 2 interviews. Personable, well-dressed, very experienced for the role. Background, drug test, all good. First day of work, no show, no call. End of the day, he calls and says he is so sorry, he can't believe he got it wrong. There was a mix-up in the days, he thought he was working, he's supposed to start on a Monday. I said, well, not a good start, but I guess stuff happens. See you tomorrow. He thanks me profusely. Second day, no show, no call. He comes in personally, right before closing, and begs me not to fire him. He has a family to support, he really needs the job, and it's perfect for him, etc. Against my better judgment, I said okay, but if you don't show up tomorrow, don't bother contacting me again. Again he thanks me profusely, says, I can count on him. Next day, no call, no show. Never heard from him again. We hired an IT guy, who was just, well, weird. Didn't seem to do much, but was always out and about, taking to people. Whatever, not my department. Then I heard he got fired. He was asked to help the CEO with his computer. The guy walked into the executive offices, acted weird, and like he knew everyone, rude, and inappropriate to the secretaries, then walked into the CEO's office, and took one look at his computer, and said, no wonder it's not working, Macs are shit. Spent 10 minutes ripping into the CEO, about his poor choice of computer, and complaining about his job, then got asked to leave. Never saw him again, after that. I worked on an IT help desk, it was me, and another guy. He quit, because there was no room for growth. They hired this guy, who supposedly had 25 years of experience in IT. I was tasked with training this guy. He was an older guy, and was so deaf, he couldn't hear the phone ringing. I had to show him how to do the same things over, and over again. Like how to install a printer. I even made training documentation, but instead of reading that, he would just ask me to show him. He was a high school football coach on the side, and that's all he talked about. After a week I went to the boss, and said, this guy is useless to me. The boss sat with him for 2 hours at his desk, and he was fired the next day. I felt bad the guy lost his job, but he was not absorbing any info, and I was doing 2 jobs. I worked a mall job, in the 1990s, at Electronics Boutique. Pokémon had just come out, and we got this new guy for Christmas help, who was just the strangest person ever. His first shift, he just sat behind the counter, opening up packs of Pokémon cards, and when confronted, he yelled, I am going to pay for them. Duh. He was walked out by the manager, about 15 seconds later. That was a really dumb kid. Day 4 of orientation. I got hired onto a trucking company, after CDL school. They had 5 days of orientation, and it took place at their headquarters, that was several states away. You could either have them fly you there, or you could drive yourself, and they would cover your expenses. Also, the company would put you up at a hotel, pay your food costs, and provide transportation to the headquarters. I didn't even think it was possible to get fired at orientation. All you have to do is show up and pretend to pay attention. This one guy drove himself there. I think he lived about 800 miles away. On the first day of orientation, he tells anyone who'll listen that he forgot to keep his receipts, and he better get reimbursed. I think I'd rather eat the costs than announce to everyone how stupid I am. On the second day, he slept in and missed the shuttle, and ended up driving himself. On the third day, he missed the shuttle, yet again, and was over an hour late. Worse than that, he fell asleep during orientation. I knew he was done for, when the instructor angrily woke him up, and asked for his full name. On day 4, he showed up on time, but his fate was sealed. When I was at the hotel, later that night, having a cigarette, I saw him loading his stuff into his car. I asked him, what happened, and, yup, got canned. I can't say I blame them. I'll be the first to admit that trucking isn't the hardest job, but being on time, paying attention, and getting adequate rest are very big keys to success. They probably made the right move. I felt bad for the guy, though. He essentially drove 800 miles to get fired, and then drove 800 miles back. That had to feel like a long trip. I warned them not to hire her. She worked at a bank, and 2 weeks after opening an account for my 15-year-old son, she looked him up on Facebook, and sent him a friend request. He doesn't even know her. Now, she was applying for a job at a high school. Day 1, after work, threw a party with said high schoolers. Fired. I warned them. I work in a government archives facility. The new guy brought food into the work area on his first day, even though there are signs everywhere saying, you can only eat in the break room. And it's just common sense. But the boss gave him the benefit of the doubt, and just gave him a warning. Couple of days later, he was eating at his desk again. Bye-bye. Don't know if he was arrogant, or just an airhead, but he definitely didn't need to be around 18th century documents. Guy came in, and got certified on the first half of the job. We put him in a forklift for part 2, and he went to his car on break. Came back drunk, to the point of being obvious. That's when I found out, we have a breathalyzer on site. Great part, they made him call a friend for a ride. They drove out of sight, immediately turned around and came back. Dude sprinted into our parking lot, and drove his car away. We had to call the cops, because he technically left work in a vehicle, while drunk. I work in a kitchen, and literally just yesterday, new guy start at 5 a.m., claims to have 20+ years experience, gets frustrated, that he is struggling with some basic recipes, slams the oven door, and breaks it, then walked out at 6:30 a.m. I would be lying, if I said I haven't witnessed this, more than once, at all the different places I've cooked at. I watched a dude get hired, told chef he had a ton of experience. Chef asked him, to go prep and debone a bunch of chickens, for some pulled chicken dish, and, this dude couldn't debone a single chicken in 2 hours. Chef was like, "The F is this? You lied, didn't you?" And fired him that day. A bird's a bird. If you've eaten a whole rotisserie chicken, or a Thanksgiving turkey, you probably can fumble your way through deboning one, in fairly short order. Blew my mind. I used to work as a deckhand for a tugboat company on the Mississippi River. The amount of people that would take jobs like that, who were deathly afraid of water, was staggering. There was a mandatory 2-week training period, for all new employees, but about 1/3 of them, never made it past their first week. 1 second you're on a boat, heading to your first job, and then the new guy is freaking out, telling the captain to turn the boat around, and head back to the dock. Years back, I worked a ski season in Europe. They bussed the staff all the way out to the Alps from London, via the Channel ferry, all in all about 18 hours transit. It's not unusual for everyone, to enjoy themselves and get a bit merry, as long as you don't cross the line. One chap, gets absolutely bladdered, ends up getting aggressive, attempts to fight a couple of his new colleagues, and ends up passed out in his seat, with puke all down him. We finally arrive at the resort, and as we're getting off the bus, the regional manager tells him, to stay put, and not to bother taking his bags off. New driver gets on, and off he goes, straight back to London, with 18 hours to think about how bad he effed up. A few days. The guy turned his camera on, during a company-wide Zoom meeting, at 10 a.m., and was laying in bed. Not even sitting up, he was laying down on a pillow, no shirt on, holding his phone above him. The crazy part was, you didn't actually have to have your video on. They are optional in these meetings. 90% of the company keeps them off. His response to all this was that he was never told what our working hours are. They were 8 to 4 bud, and if there is a company-wide meeting scheduled, probably safe to assume it's considered working hours. I ran the college onboarding software developer group for a large telecom. The first day onboarding was with HR and health insurance and 401k, etc. All that really mundane stuff. I would sit in the back of the room and watch to see the incoming group, to see how they react to corporate life. 1 guy asks HR person how soon they get promoted. Said that the person that hired him said it would be within 2 weeks, and he would be a director within a few months. I hired him. He was sent home before the first coffee break at 10 a.m. 2 girl started hitting on the other guys in the room. Like, flirting beyond anything I have ever seen. Offered one guy a blowjob. She lasted till lunch. 3 so many, drunk or drugged, I can't count, or remember them all. His first day of training, he was hired to be an assistant manager. He told the manager training him, that he wasn't going to do what she was showing him, because that was woman's work, and he wouldn't be a hands-on manager, because that's what the employees were for. He was only there to supervise. He only made it 2, maybe 3 hours, into the shift, before she lost it on him, and told him, to go home. Worked at Best Buy, and around 2010, we hired for the holiday season. I think it was his second day, and I was organizing games on the bottom shelf, and he came up to me, and said, "Hey, check this out," and bounced up and down. I started hearing a clapping noise. Like, clap 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 clap. Literally no idea how, but his balls were making that clapping noise. This was at my face level, too, since I was kneeling down. Being a 20-year-old dude, part of me thought it was horrifying, the other hilarious, in a, what the F is this actually happening, kinda way. But apparently, he went around and did it to everyone, and some girls reported him for sexual harassment, and he was fired fairly quickly. I've tried to recreate it throughout my life, but I have no idea how the guy did it. He was young. The clapping was so loud. I worked for an anime website aimed at young teens. On his first day at work, a new engineer mentioned to our IT guy that there was some monitoring software he had to install on his work laptop. Turns out, he was a convicted child predator and had court-ordered monitoring of all his online activity. He hadn't disclosed any of this in his job app or interviews. Got walked out the door instead of getting his laptop. New guy, cannabis farm, asked about smoking at lunch. I gave him the spiel. It's against the state rules, and if I can tell you're high, it's a big problem. Otherwise, it's none of my business. After lunch, I saw him in the field, leaning on his shovel. Okay, we all need to take a rest now and then. 5 minutes later, I check and he hasn't moved. Well, it's his first day, and it's hot out. 10 minutes, same position and location. Tried talking to him, and got incoherent mumbling. Turns out, he was hitting a DMT vape. Worked in a shop that turned big glass sheets into shower enclosures, panels for balconies, etc. New guy had been there for about 30 minutes, just enough time to go through the orientation that explains how to properly carry glass, where to put your hands, how to pick it up, and set it down without breaking it and hurting yourself. Guy's carrying a shower door when he realizes he forgot something at the previous station. So, he stops on a dime and does a 180, not an approved maneuver from the orientation, as one might imagine, and slams the glass right into a rack that is holding a bunch of untampered shower doors. Door in his hand splits in two, leaving a deep gash in his palm, and some of the doors on the rack also break, dropping huge swords of glass all around him. He was lucky just to have his hand sliced. His hand was bandaged, and he was out the door shortly after, bound for a hospital to get stitches. Never saw him again after that. Once knew an RN who didn't show up for her first day. Turns out, she was in jail. The night before, she had gotten drunk, got into a fight with her boyfriend, and run over him with her car. He was life-flighted out, and had to have a leg amputated. His family hated her. He was a farmer that she'd met on Farmers Only dating site. She was fired before she ever made it to her first day. Afterwards, she would sneak into the hospital to see him, because his family had her banned from visiting. The day he had to have his second leg amputated, she told him she was seeing someone else. She told me she was going to marry this new guy, and her mother was furious. Because he was her mother's former fiancé. This is a true story. I never spoke to her again, as I was too afraid to let this hurricane near my family. I've got a good one. My friend was a creative who moved to LA for a year-long gig that had ended, and he needed a job. He got hired by a company that was a couple hours away that would cover his room and board on site. Kinda weird, but sure, great. So, he broke his lease and packed up to move. His first day, his boss welcomed him in, showed him around, took him to his new office, and said he'd let him get settled. Lunch is available in the cafeteria at 11 o'clock. He went to the cafeteria and explained to the cook that he had a life-threatening fish allergy and couldn't eat anything if it had been cooked on the same grill as fish. The cook wasn't very reassuring, so he ate something safe and went back to his desk. 30 minutes later, his boss came in and said it wasn't working out. My friend started crying. He didn't understand what he'd done wrong, because he hasn't done anything wrong. Anyway, that was around 2005. A couple years later, he tells me the name of the company. It was the effing Church of Scientology. Turns out, he dodged a huge bullet